All right, how's everybody doing?
Yeah.
Entertained? Are you not entertained? I'm Mark Young. It's a distinct privilege to be with these wise, experienced, and distinguished panelists. So right off the gate, let me ask each one of them to just say about 30 seconds on who they are and where they're from.
I'm Eitan Danon. I'm a senior cybercrimes investigator at Chainalysis. Chainalysis is the leading crypto data analytics company. We sit at the intersection of crypto businesses, governments, and financial institutions. We support complex investigations, compliance, and education. We've got over 1,000 customers in 75 plus countries.
My name is Trent Tima. I'm here with the MobileCoin Foundation. Retired from the FBI, spent 27 years with that doing cyber investigations, criminal investigations. I run a consultancy that does national security, strategy, and investigative advice to companies like yours in how to understand the ecosystem, dealing with government policy and regulation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kurt Opsahl. I am the counsel for cybersecurity and civil liberties with the Filecoin Foundation. I'm also a special counsel with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and for about the last 18 years, I was also a lawyer with the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Howdy, folks. I'm Lia Holland. I use they, she pronouns. I am the Campaigns and Communications Director with the National Digital Rights nonprofit Fight for the Future, where we advocate for privacy against surveillance and stand up for the right to code and all the protections of the First Amendment for people who build privacy tools.
Thank you. So we have, just like every other panel that you've witnessed this afternoon, we've got much ground to cover and not much time to cover it in. So we'll kick it off. I'm going to do a lightning round in the beginning and then a lightning round at the end. So the first thing is I'm going to define, these are not legal definitions, but I'm going to define privacy and security, and then I'm going to ask each panelist to answer one question about it. So I'm going to define privacy as the absence of undue corporate tracking or government surveillance of a digital asset transaction. Security, we're going to define as the avoidance of fraud, theft, or other illicit activities, or identity exposure concerning any transaction. So with those definitions, let's start with Lia. Are these characteristics a zero-sum equation, or are they mutually supportive?
I would say that depends on who you are and what your threat model is. So yes and no.
All right, well, I would say actually I would have broader definitions. I think that the privacy is a right to be left alone, which includes but is not limited to someone getting into your business as to what financial transactions that you're making, and also that security is to protect yourselves from danger, and those dangers can be broader than fraud or such. It could be a danger from the government coming to arrest you because they find you an opposition figure. And so this is one I think that privacy and security go together, that you need both, that security is necessary in order to effectuate your privacy, that if someone can break through and get to your private information, you don't have much security. And then privacy is necessary to have good security. That if you don't have the privacy about your life, about what you are doing, that makes you more vulnerable to possible threats. Now, of course, I agree, it would depend on what your threat model is, how you're going to prioritize these two things. So how it balances out for a particular person will depend on that, but these things do go together.
Well, so let me just dig into that just for a second. So is it a zero-sum game? In other words, if I enhance one, do I sacrifice the other?
No, it's not. I think that you can have both of these together. You can make sure that you have the maximum of each. And for different people, they may want to balance it one way or the other for what their threat models may be, but having them both is fundamental.
Trent.
Yeah, so you need them together. You need privacy and security together for it to work. You can't, security should be there to maintain privacy. It's that whole backup, because ultimately you're trying to protect people's information, the data. The security there is to make sure to keep that norm. So you need both together to make it work.
Eitan?
I also think they go together. I think both are critical, and neither should come at the expense of the other.
It's that balance.
Fair enough. Lia, so let's come back to you. Your organization acknowledges that while tech can transform society, upend injustice, and hold power to account. It can also silence the marginalized, automate oppression, and compromise basic rights. What are your thoughts on end-to-end encryption messaging apps? How do these encryption messaging apps support the marginalized, reduce oppression, and preserve basic rights?
That's a great question. And I'd like to start by saying that Fight for the Future doesn't just advocate for encrypted messaging apps. We advocate for vigorous end-to-end encryption in any place online where our private personal data is stored or communicated, and we think that that's incredibly essential for human rights. That, of course, includes financial data and financial surveillance. We believe that privacy is a fundamental human right because it is safety. If we don't have privacy in our personal information, the information that can be used to harm us by a variety of different actors, be they hackers, stalkers, or authoritarian governments, then we don't really have much in terms of rights when we're speaking truth to power. So today, the data that is being collected on individuals all across the internet, no matter what service they're using, is really a huge threat to marginalized people, because marginalized people are, by and large, criminalized. To be marginalized often is to be criminalized in many countries, including the United States. And that information is a huge vulnerability for individuals today who are in many different identity groups. And I think also that data is an incredible threat to all of us, because none of us can predict the future. The data that's being collected on us today could be taken as by an employer, for example, through a data broker to decide whether or not you get a job 5 years from now, or it could be used by an authoritarian government to persecute a journalist or an activist that has since relocated to that country, or an authoritarian government that didn't exist when that data was first captured. And then additionally, there's the questions of you getting into and out of an abusive relationship, and what having a vast amount of private personal data out there means for you and your personal safety. It's not suspicious, in our opinion, and it's not criminal, in our opinion, to seek privacy. It's just smart, because none of us know what the future can predict, and we all should live in a future-proof way.
Good. Well, excellent. So speaking of encryption, I'm going to stick with you. In February 2016, the FBI wanted Apple to unlock an iPhone connected to a mass shooting event in San Bernardino, California, that killed 14 people. Apple declined. Before a judge could hear the case to compel Apple to unlock the phone, the FBI went to a third party and unlocked that phone. Incidentally, no information relevant to the investigation was found on that phone. But would you support the FBI's request in that case? Why or why not?
Well, mass shootings are awful, but I'm sorry, no, because I really don't believe, and as an organization, we don't really believe that the fact that bad people exist and are going to do bad things means that none of us should have rights. And we further don't believe that it is appropriate to treat every single person in this country as if they are guilty until they are proven innocent by constant surveillance. The flaw here that's really difficult to grapple with is that we as humans often tend to think that tech will save us. It'll save us from things like the desperation that leads to extremism. And that just hasn't borne out throughout history. I mean, we had bad people before we had centralized banks or cell phones. And I mean, call me a cynic, but I kind of think that bad people are going to do bad things no matter what. And we really just need to be thinking about rights that include privacy being denied to us as something that makes us less safe, not more safe, because they're integral to our basic our basic security ever more as our lives are, as so many panelists have already referenced, incredibly digital. And I have to like kind of turn that question around in this environment where we're so concerned about being hacked or stalked or abused or what have you, with all of this data that's just laying out there for anybody to take, to ask, like, why would anyone trade human rights and safety for billions of people for the chance that a crime could be solved? The weight there for me is really incredibly different. And I think that like there's one more point here that I think it's important to make about blockchain specifically, which is that most chains right now have a public ledger, and these same threats that we face from data brokers in Web 2, when we talk about end-to-end encryption apps or what have you, are threats that Web 3 is facing as well. I'm actually on stage here with perhaps Web 3's most prominent data broker, Chainalysis, which is taking information from the blockchain and monetizing the identification, the doxing of people on chain. And whether Chainalysis or another organization, that data is being collected and it's being used to make lists. And I'm really concerned that those lists are, for example, teachers in Afghanistan who received Bitcoin in order to keep teaching girls under the Taliban, and that list will then be used for executions. Or lists of people who contributed crypto to Planned Parenthood that 5 years down the road will be used to persecute those who help people in Texas get an abortion. And I just really feel as if we need to get down to brass tacks over the need for privacy coins, the need for greater consumer protection and education in this space, and finally, just federal data privacy protection. Like, enshrining this human right in this country is something that is so long overdue. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you.
That's great. I think Benjamin Franklin, would agree with you. He said those who would sacrifice privacy for security are deserving of neither. So Eitan, in your 2023 crime report, Chainalysis noted that illicit transaction hit an all-time high in 2022. We all must acknowledge that money laundering, theft, scams, these are part of the crypto ecosystem, albeit at a smaller percentage than the fiat ecosystem. So, should these illicit activities be as accepted in crypto as they are in traditional finance?
So on a fundamental level, there's nothing inherently illicit or criminal about cryptocurrency technology. And actually at Chainalysis, we believe in the transformative power of crypto to foster innovation and increase financial inclusion and to support humanitarian activity, which we've seen in Ukraine over the past year and more recently after the earthquake in Turkey. I think a lot of people would say that cryptocurrency facilitates ransomware, but actually it's the unique transparency of the blockchain, of public blockchains, that enable investigators to tackle criminal networks and bad actors. And so if you take ransomware as an example, the way to tackle ransomware is to disrupt what's called the ransomware supply chains. You're looking at authors and developers, malware entities, money laundering services, infrastructure providers, cash out points. And so the transparency of the blockchain would allow an investigator to look at all of that information, follow the money in real time, and work with CeFi and DeFi organizations and with governments to disrupt that activity. And it's a proven successful method. I would say to the extent that cybercrime moves in the direction of cash, like you were talking about, the fiat system in that direction of cash and shell companies and traditional money laundering typologies, that would complicate the efforts of investigators. But transparency is key.
Good, good. So is there anything that, from your perspective, is there anything that builders can do to drive down that illicit activity?
That builders can incorporate? Hands down, I would say our recommendation would be code audits. I think going to the transparency factor, DeFi is fast growing, it's extremely compelling, and if you flip that around, That's also the greatest source of vulnerability, and the magnitude of scams and hacks that the space has seen in recent years begs for more security, more hardening of defenses. I think there's a need and a niche for independent, trusted third-party providers to give, it's not a sexy job description, but code auditing to prevent malicious actors from stealing funds and cashing them out. For what it's worth, also, until recently, many centralized exchanges were hacked, and there was a concerted investment in security, and we've seen a decrease in those hacks. So there's kind of a profit and a non-monetary dividend, I think, to be reaped from that kind of investment.
So I'm going to ask you to telegraph Chainalysis crime report for next year. What illicit activities do you think will be increasing in this current year that we're in?
So going off of our data from last year, the two categories that I think we can expect to stay at least stagnant but probably rise are sanctioned entities and stolen funds from hacks. On the sanctions front, assuming the war on Ukraine does not abate, which it does not look like it will do anytime soon, and with OFAC and similar ministries and departments worldwide designating kind of the tenor of the sanctions regime, designating not only individual actors and wallets, but at the service level, which will raise exposure, I think that's a trend that we anticipate will continue in the next year. On stolen funds and hacks, hackers show no sign of letting up. In particular, cyber criminals affiliated with North Korean cybercrime syndicates. They've stolen billions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency in recent years, which is a worrying trend. I think it's also worth noting that ransomware payments are on the decline in the past year. Not attacks, but payments, and we attribute that to a couple of factors, one of which is a circular that kind of raised the risk of sanctions exposure, that if you are extorted and are a victim, you risk yourself being designated or at least being exposed to designations. And the other one is that cyber insurance companies are being much more judicious and tightening up who they will insure. But the fact that payments are on the decline, I think on a macro level, is a good news story, and hopefully will support the push to harden defenses and longer term make ransomware kind of not a profitable industry to pursue.
Let's hope. Thank you. Trent, as a former FBI special agent, how do you feel about technologies that obfuscate the identity of individuals who may be violating the law with crypto, including ransomware attacks like we saw against Colonial Pipeline in 2021?
So let me flip the question a little bit. So as an FBI agent, I'd like to see 98% of the transactions secure and private, and then that makes my job easier to focus on the 2% that are bad. Same thing, like I'd like to see, so it's if you look at the builders and the different crypto ecosystems out there, depending on where you want to be, if you want to be more mainstream, then you're going to need to follow more rules, regulations, privacy, policy, compliance. If you're going to be more on the outside, you're going to attract more bad actors. And the one challenge that I put to everybody else is I really love to see 98% of it secure, private. Because if as an investigator, I just have to be better at doing it. But I'd also challenge the builders to actually build something that doesn't enhance or encourage bad acts that you don't want on your networks anyways, because it actually messes it up for everybody else. Ransomware, you say ransomware, you think crypto. And the majority of, like here in the United States, they put two and two together and they shouldn't. And it causes problems for everybody. So how do we stop that, and how do we make it, hey, I'm glad you're doing private, secure transactions. It's innovative, it's here to stay, we want to support it, but how do we mitigate that criminal activity and what's going on? And I give you the Colonial Pipeline, perfect example. Ransomware crew from Russia shuts down oil gas up in the Northeast, damn near act of war. I mean, that's how close it came. Trying to do the ransomware, so everybody involved in that, so you have the highest levels of the United States government talking to the highest levels of the Russian government to try and stop this because it messed it up for the entire ecosystem. You just can't do that. So anything that would stop it to actually not make it as a favorable, so look, you don't want to be seeing cryptocurrency and crypto builders don't want to see as illicit and money laundering, You're actually trying to do private transactions to help people in Ukraine, marginalized communities, all this other things for all the right reasons. You want to promote that, but not promote the bad acts. So,
but you're not suggesting that developers should be required to put in features that would help a law enforcement investigation, are you?
oh no, absolutely not. But when you're designing it, you might want to think about it, because the thing is like, you got to think of it as, we're all in this together. And I've worked many cases where I've gone after hackers, crackers, whatever, and they've done some pretty bad stuff. And the people that were most incensed were the guys that ran the networks, because I came in and destroyed their entire system, and they did more to help me track them down to get the bad guy. And that's what we're talking about. It's a realistic approach to what we're trying to do. You can't be absolute, because it won't work in this world. You have to look at it with a moderate approach, I guess.
So with Eitan sitting next to you, I'm just curious, in your career, you made use of an awful lot of cyber threat intelligence.
Yeah.
Is there an analog in digital assets that would help any investigation, or frankly the industry, focus on the most significant threats, which will evolve over time, as we've seen? Is there any analog to a cyber threat intelligence product that we should be looking at?
So, one of the great things about blockchain, it's a public blockchain. You tell that to an FBI agent, most of them are CPAs. It's an immutable ledger. They got that down. We got that from day one. We understand how to look at ledgers. The reason why the blockchain is public was for all the reasons why it's public. So you're sharing it across. But for the threat intelligence, I want to focus on the 2%. Where I'm having to chase all this, noise and traffic, as opposed to going after the bad, there's a limited amount of agents I'd have on a squad or I have in my field office to chase after the problems. I want to put my resources against the worst problems and not go after everything else. So if there is a way to help us make sense of where bad acts are going on, and literally, I get calls all the time, back when I was on the job, where, hey, something's going on, you need to look over here. This is bad for everybody. Take a look at it. And that's what we'd look at. And that's really what's of importance.
Good, thank you. Kurt, thanks for your patience. This question might be undone by your opening remark, but I'll ask it anyway. What are the consequences of an imbalance between security and privacy to Web3 developers, to users, and the general public? For example, if we over-biased on privacy, if we really amped up the privacy features capability of a protocol, what are the downsides of that?
Well, I am a strong advocate of increasing the privacy of the protocol. In fact, I think it was great to have the Privacy by Design panel right before this one to explain how to do that from the get-go and to look at what that, and I think this will also increase the security, right? That by building in security and privacy features into this, it can make it safer, more secure, and as you were just saying, that like having it so that there is less attack surface by auditing code, so there are less problem. This helps keep our security better and can provide more privacy. So putting these things together and building privacy, strong privacy by design, so that people can be left alone if they want to. If they want to disclose some information, they can do so. They have the choice about what they want to do with that information and a control. And sometimes, if it is necessary to deal with a security incident, they may want to disclose some information. If it's not necessary, they want to keep it to themselves. And this is something that is fundamental for protecting people and allowing to take advantage of some of these new technologies. And privacy is a right that effectuates other rights. It allows you to have freedom of expression by consuming media that you choose, by supporting organizations that you're politically supportive of. It allows you to be the cornerstone of being able to have an autonomous mind where you can think for yourself without having somebody look over your shoulder. So that's why it is incredibly vital to have privacy built in from the get-go into all of these technologies, and then that will also give you security.
So thank you. In between the lines of your comments, though, is the elephant in the room is surveillance. So I'm going to ask, is all surveillance created equal? For example, is Google's tracking of my internet searches, is that the same as government monitoring my crypto transactions?
So I think there are many differences in surveillance, and I think that's an important distinction, is that corporate surveillance is very invasive, and I understand why people want to protect themselves very strongly from that, and they should. But the corporations don't yet have the ability to arrest you, don't have the ability to put you in jail in the way that a nation state can. And when it comes to the nation threat model, there are many nation states out there, some of which are pretty authoritarian, who will do some pretty nasty things to people. So these protections can save lives. So I'd also make an important distinction, mass surveillance versus targeted surveillance. That mass surveillance is what a lot of these surveillance programs, and modern surveillance programs, are trying to do, where they want to get full information over a wide swath so that they can look at that information later. They not have no suspicion at first, but just have a database that is available, and they can look back in time. They have a time machine, so if somebody becomes suspicious, they can look at everything that they've ever done. And as we were just talking about, there might be an authoritarian regime that arises after you put this data in there, when you weren't thinking that in your threat model. And if you have that database that's been around forever and you trusted the government, so they'll do a good job with this, don't worry about it, that database still exists when there's now a new government, one who's not trustworthy, and they can look back in the time machine and say, oh, you did something that was legal then, but we've decided it's not legal now. And this is what can protect you from the future.
Well said. Thank you. So the time has gone super quick. We're going to end on another lightning round. So I'm going to ask a question about this. On August 8th, last year, the Office of Foreign Assets Control put Tornado Cash smart contracts on the sanctions list. They had put some custodial wallets and non-custodial wallets on the list before, but this was the first time it was a non-custodial protocol. Last September, a month later, Coinbase funded the lawsuit challenging the Tornado Cash sanctions, primarily claiming that Treasury had overstepped its authority. So my question to each of you, each of the panelists, is, if you were the judge in this case, how would you rule? Let's start with Eitan.
I'm thankful I'm not a judge, first of all. That does not strike me as a fun assignment in this case. I understand both sides. I mean, virtually no one here would say that privacy isn't invaluable, and on the face of it, mixers there's no reason they shouldn't be able to provide that service, including Tornado Cash. On the other hand, 25% of mixed funds came from illicit addresses, and Tornado Cash was used by North Korea-linked cyber criminals kind of repeatedly and repeatedly, so I understand that, but I don't know, mistrial, or I can't say.
Well, I'm just reminded of Lia's remarks, though, that in some ways, putting them on the sanctions list punishes the innocent because of the guilty. Yeah. But Trent, please, you're the judge. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm going to turn it a little bit, because one of the problems with rulemaking agencies, actually, now there's a process they follow before you put them on the list. But this is where the legislative branch needs to further articulate how you go into this, because the problem is same thing with the ransomware. I'll go back to that example. Somebody's paying a ransomware extortion because they have to get the company back into business. They don't know who it is, but it turns out to be the North Koreans. Well, now the victim's being victimized and maybe sanctioned because they're just trying to do the right thing. It's a difficult decision for the judge, and we have to look at it differently. The sanctions sometimes are overused, in my opinion.
Very good. Kurt.
So I'm a civil liberties lawyer, so I look at it from that perspective, and I would hold that code is speech. That this is a code that has been put on the sanction list, and the government has not shown that this is the least restrictive means of achieving their purpose. And that means it does not survive scrutiny, and so we're striking it down.
The Supreme Court has said as much. Lia, please.
Yeah, and I just add that human rights often make governments uncomfortable because they are so good at violating them. And that the issue at hand here really is one of a basic human right that we should all have, and based in a privilege that many of us, myself included, don't have, of whether or not you feel safer with the government watching over your shoulder, whether you feel safer with corporations watching over your shoulder. Many of us don't. Many of us don't have that privilege, and that's why we at Fight for the Future spun up a letter with 60-plus privacy-preserving projects and organizations this spring in response to the tornado cash sanctions, calling on the government to return to our long tradition of honoring the First Amendment and having privacy tools built here and celebrated in the U.S.
Hear, hear. Thank you all for letting us go over a little bit of time. Thanks to all these excellent panelists. This was a privilege, and rock on, builders.
And I have stickers. I'm over there. They're sparkly.